Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Brazil post-sprint race reaction. What was your thoughts in this sprint race? I thought it was a fairly good sprint race, but I think they're actually getting better as the season goes on, probably because there's a little bit more on the line for those constructors' points in the drivers' standings. So there's a little bit more risk to be put out there to gain those extra few points. So I think that's adding to the factor of the enjoyment of the sprint races. Generally, I'm not a fan of those, but we'll have to see if that changes my mind as the next seasons and stuff come through, if they're coming down to the wire, if they actually get more exciting or not. Now, there was a little bit of controversy of the yellow flag for Hulkenberg changing to a virtual safety car and how long that took, as it was a little bit longer than most people would have expected it to. They think that it should have been a little bit quicker, which would have then thrown a loop into McLaren's swapping of the positions for Lando and Oscar. And I'm kind of on that fence there because it seemed to take a little bit longer than should be, especially with Hulkenberg out of the car and on the side of the track, kind of walking away with cars going by. I figured that would have been a clear sign that they needed to have a virtual safety car in that spot, saying, hey, we have a dangerous situation that we need to avoid. Now, there's also the Max Verstappen coming up alongside of Oscar at the end of the safety car, where the virtual safety car, where he came just on the edge, trying to anticipate the start of that, and that ended up giving him a 5-second penalty. I was not expecting that. I figured they would have let that pass, as he got clearly behind him before the virtual safety car went away in the next corner. So I think he lost his momentum there, but they still gave it to him anyway. So that kind of pushed him back a spot there as well. So that was a little bit more controversy on this whole McLaren versus Red Bull front, and if there's any other things to play and all the conspiracy theorists there. Now, I don't think there's anything specifically for the FIA trying to put more pressure in closing that gap, but I could be wrong in that factor, as we've seen in the past, some favoritism in some certain people, not necessarily the whole organization. So I think that was kind of just happenstance in this case, and they were just penalizing because it was actually against the rules in that fraction of that piece where he came alongside in that virtual safety car, as he shouldn't have done that anyway. But we'll have to see how things play out in the next 3 or 4 races here. So without further ado, I will start off with the back of the pack and work my way through the drivers and tell you what I know about them and what I thought of their driving in that process. So without further, we have Nico Hulkenberg, who ended up in 20th and had the only DNF in this sprint race. And of course, that was the one that brought out the yellow flag and then eventually the virtual safety car. He did qualify in 12th, so not quite as high as his teammate, but a decent run for him. And he was doing fairly well early on. He did gain 3 positions at that first lap, so he did a good start. Had a good run for it, and then I think they said that he was having an exhaust issue of some sort, because you could see that smoke coming out of his, back of his Haas, and he ended up having to stop on lap 21 around turn 10. I think it was the inside of turn 10. So that kind of caused the whole yellow flags, and eventually this virtual safety car was ended on lap 22. So it took a couple of, it was the end of that lap. So it was basically almost a full, 2 or 3 laps that virtual safety car was under at the very end of the sprint race, which kind of locked things in place. But otherwise, he was doing really good, I think, in general. So hopefully nothing too serious was done on that Haas, and he can qualify well later this afternoon and participate in the GP race and do some good results for Haas, as they have been on a streak lately. So hopefully that plays out for them. Lance Stroll qualified in 19th and ended up in 19th. He had a horrible day, as well as the other Aston Martin in this running. He did start from the pit lane after changing some parts during Parc Fermé, so He started in that pit lane. Even though he qualified in 19th, he still started in 19th. And then he passed Juan Zhou on lap 14 for that 19th spot. So he ended up getting overtaken at one point and had to take back that 19th spot. So not a very good day for Aston Martin or Lance Stroll in that matter. And then, of course, he had Fernando Alonso, who was sick earlier on and flew off to get some medicine or to do something kind of issues, and then came back for the sprint race. And he too started from the pit lane due to Parc Fermé changes, and he qualified in actually 16th, and started in 18th because of that pit lane start, and ended up 18th. Didn't really have a whole lot of action for him that I saw, so he was kind of in the back of the pack, kind of just running around. So hopefully he feels better for the GP qualifying and the full race. That hopefully he can actually perform like we expect him to perform in that Aston Martin, which is not at the very back of the pack. So hopefully that's just a coincidence and nothing too futuristic to see from Aston Martin. Now you have Juan Zhou, who qualified in 20th and made it up to 17th. He did start from the pit lane as well due to Parc Fermé changes that he did. And he passed Stroll on lap 17 for that 19th spot and ended up into far up to that 17th eventually. And then you have Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, who did better in the qualifying session, but kind of fell back a little bit by qualifying in 15th and ended up in 16th. And he lost that spot at the very first lap, and then basically was stayed there for the rest of the lap. I don't have any kind of action for him at that back of the field. So there's still some work to be done on that stake kick F1 as well. Even though they're doing slightly better than the past few races, they're still pretty much at the back of the pack and have a lot of work to do before Audi really takes over that team. So kind of hard to see those stake drivers of Valtteri and Juan Zhou in that backpack, and basically, potentially losing their drive seats for next season. So who knows what will happen with them. Yuki Tsunoda qualified in 17th. Actually qualified in 18th and got bumped up to 17th because of the other Alonso dropping down, but ended up in, that 15th position at the end of the race, and I have him passing Bottas on lap 10 for that 16th position. So not a great race for him, working his way up, and then having Nico Hülkenberg drop out of the race that dropped him up that one more position. So he is still struggling in that RB, and that is not a good look since Lawson is ahead of him in that same RB as well. So we'll have to see how that battle between the new teammate and the old teammate play out, and all of the rumors around the RB and, of course, the Red Bull seat of Sergio Perez in that mix of who will take what seat, and if anybody in the RB will get bumped up to Red Bull, or will they stay in those RB seats as for next season. And I think Yuki, I don't know, he's having a hard time dealing with the pressure, and I can understand that because basically it seems like you're being overlooked in all of the conversations that I've heard and the rumors mill. He has a little bit to work through, but I think he deserves some kind of, trial at least. So hopefully he will get that so that he can show what he can do. Then we have Oliver Behrman sitting in for Kevin Magnussen, who got sick and was not able to perform this weekend. So Oliver Behrman will be sitting in for Kevin Magnussen for the whole weekend. Oliver Behrman did a really good job in qualifying 10th. He kind of messed up one of his qualifying laps, or else he would have been a little bit farther up on the grid. And I think he is seriously disappointed that he dropped down to 14th overall. I have him passing Hülkenberg on lap 9 for that 9th position. And then near the end of the race, I'm not sure if they just overspent their tires or whatnot, but they ended up dropping back fairly significantly in the last couple of laps of this sprint race. So we'll have to see if they can figure out that data for the GP race so that that doesn't really happen and they can get their strategy down for that. Esteban Ocon did a fair job. He qualified in 17th, got bumped up to 16th to start the race, and then ended up in 13th overall. He passed Hulkenberg on lap 21 for 14th, and passed Behrman on lap 24 for that 13th position. So he did a little bit of passing on track and was kind of in that back, trying to work his way up. Not quite what he wants because his teammate is, ended up getting into the points. But they were on a slightly different tire strategy. I think he was still on the old, medium tires, where his teammate Pierre Gasly was on a newer set of mediums, trying to get those points when they could. So trying to do the strategic point alignment. So there's a little bit, issues there between the two teammates, but there's a little bit different strategy. So we'll have to see how Esteban performs in the GP race compared to his teammate Pierre Gasly to see if that plays out in any fashion. And then you have the big fan favorite for this race is Franco Colapinto, who ended up qualifying in 14th and it made his way up to 12th. He did gain a spot at the first lap, and he passed Hulkenberg on lap 18th for 11th, and passed Behrman on lap 19 for 10th, slowly making his way up to that front of that point, almost getting into the points. I guess he's a little farther away because of the sprint race, but he's still getting up there, trying to play it out. And of course, with Lewis Hamilton just ahead of him, it's hard to really fight those more experienced drivers in these things. And I assume that he's probably going to do fairly well in the GP race tomorrow, as he seems to have the fighter mentality and trying to get out there and do what he can. He was a little bit farther behind than his teammate, but I think he's still doing a really good job, and it seems to be like a lot of people are clamoring over him to see if they can figure out a way to get him onto the grid in 2025. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Lewis Hamilton qualified in 11th and ended up in 11th, lost 3 places on that first lap, so he had to regain those spots through issues. And then he basically have him passing Franco on lap 19 for that 13th position. And I know his interview was saying that he was a really hard time, with that car. He was really struggling, worse than qualifying. So we'll have to see if Mercedes can actually figure out what the data they need from the sprint race to make those slight changes for the qualifying session, so that they can get a little bit farther up in the grid to make it a little bit more comfortable for Lewis Hamilton. Otherwise, he had a kind of a dull day in that regard. So that gets us through the bottom 10. Now we'll head to the top 10, where we have Alex Albon. Ended up qualifying in 9th and make his way up to 10th. He did lose 2 positions at the start of the grid, so he didn't have the best start either. But he regained those and made his way up to 10th, passing Hulkenberg on lap 18 for 11th and passing Behrman on lap 19 for 10th position. So I think he was thinking that Williams had a little bit more in it, and was getting closer to that point range, but was not able to pull it off. So he has a little bit more work to do, and hopefully they can get that data from the sprint race to be a little bit more competitive in the GP race. But I think he did a decent job in that Williams comparatively from what they've done in the last couple of races. So we'll have to see how that plays out, if they're on that turning around and getting that upward swing again or not, with the RBs and the Haas's kind of putting a little more pressure on them. Then you have Liam Lawson, who qualified in 8th and ended up in 9th. He passed Perez on lap, 12, I believe, for 8th position. And he had a battle with Perez at that point in time. So they were going back and forth in that run, and just kind of worked his way out where he wasn't quite as aggressive, I think. I think they had a little talking to for Liam on that Perez front for that Red Bull seat, because Red Bull, of course, is the bigger team in that front, and so he wants to be moved up to that. So he has to play nice with Red Bull in that that sister team of RB. So I think that was kind of playing into that battle, where I know Liam likes to be really aggressive and try to just get as far as he can into the front of the field. So we'll have to see how that plays out tomorrow, if there's any more conflict between him and Sergio. Speaking of Sergio, he played in 13th, had a horrible qualifying session, mainly getting out at the wrong time. Not his fault. It seems like the team's fault for waiting a little bit too long before getting him out into that qualifying session. And that kind of shows as he was able to work his way back up into the last point position, but into the points, into that 8th position overall. So he gained a position at the start of the lap. So that was good to see. He passed Hulkenberg on lap 9 for 10th. He passed Behrman on lap 11 for 9th. He passed Lawson on lap 15 for 8th, and he passed Lawson again on lap 20 for 8th. So he was kind of battling Lawson a little bit there, but was able to finally get past him and into that solidify that 8th position in that point range, helping out Red Bull in their championship battles. So not where they, of course, want him to be, but at least he's getting up there and getting some points in that run after that disastrous qualifying session that the team put him in. So I think Perez did a fairly good job today. And that battle with his up-and-coming Liam Lawson was good to see, and it was a little bit cleaner than it seemed to be in the past. So hopefully that will kind of smooth down the feathers between the two of them and make them, have a good competitive run, but not a, disastrous friendship kind of battle that would go on. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Of course, then we have Pierre Gasly, qualified in 7th, had an excellent qualifying session, getting up there all the way up to the 7th spot, and then choosing that new set of mediums, I believe, what I heard, to maintain that 7th spot through the sprint race, so gaining 2 points for Alpine, and that was always a good thing. He was kind of battling by himself in that run, ahead of Sergio Perez in the backpack, but too far behind George Russell in that front pack to really put any kind of pressure on them as well. So he had his own race, did it really well, maintained that spot from the start of the race, did a good job in that. So I think he did pretty much what he needed to do and what he could do in the sprint race. So we'll have to see if that hurts him too much in the Grand Prix or not, having that tire selection that he did for the sprint race. Then we have George Russell, who basically, again, qualified in 6th and ended up in 6th and had a kind of a quiet race by himself in that run, not having to put too much pressure on Carlos or get too much pressure from Pierre Gasly. So he kind of maintained that position. I expect that Mercedes, I didn't hear from him directly, but I expect that was still pretty rough to race, to go through based on Hamilton's interview. So maybe they can make some changes to maybe put some pressure on those Ferraris and Red Bulls in front of them for the Grand Prix and the long stint that they have to do. And then you have Carlos Sainz, who qualified in 5th, ended up in 5th. So another kind of boring run for him, but gaining some points for Ferrari, which is always good as they're trying to start fighting for that constructor's spot in that run, thinking that they can actually potentially overtake McLaren. But they'll have to do a little bit better than they have done today, being both behind the two McLarens in the sprint race. So losing a few points from them in that run. Max Verstappen qualified in 4th, ended up in 3rd at the end of the race, but then had that 5-second penalty after the race for that virtual safety car infringement, as I said. So it dropped him back to that 4th position. So overall, I think he was kind of frustrated. He did a dive. He did lock up the tires, and I thought that was going to actually affect him more on that first lap in that first corner. because he locked him up on the inside and then had to back out a little bit. And I figured that was kind of worn and kind of flat spotted his tires enough that would have caused a little bit more issues for him during the sprint race, but it didn't seem to cause anything. He was kind of right behind Charles Leclerc for the most of the race, ended up having to pass him at one point, getting up into that third position. And then he was basically getting up alongside of Oscar at the end of the virtual safety car, which caused that infringement. And so then he dropped back behind Charles Leclerc to that fourth position overall. So a fairly good run, kind of a bad mistake on his front to drop him back and lose that extra point. But he still has a very good shot at winning the Drivers' Championship. So I know he wants every point he can get, but hopefully it's not going to hurt him too bad in that run. Basically, I have him, going through and passing Leclerc on lap 18 for that third position, and then basically just kind of hounding him throughout this race. So he did a fairly good job in this race, even though qualifying wasn't quite where he wanted, being on that fourth position, and then ended up into that fourth position overall. So getting that bump was kind of hard. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And then you have Charles Leclerc, who qualified in third. So actually I have that kind of wrong on the board. I apologize for that. Due to the last minute changes, I did not get that set. So he qualified in third and ended up in third due to that penalty. I know he said he was pushing pressure on the McLaren to the very beginning of the race and kind of wore his tires out, which caused him to drop behind Max Verstappen, as Max was a better tire management and it was better at the end of the race than he was. So he'll have to take that and learn from that. But he ended up getting that third position due to that mistake that Max did during that virtual safety car. So we'll have to see if they can learn and really put pressure on the McLarens and stay ahead of the Red Bulls during the qualifying session and the GP race, as the Red Bull seems to be looking pretty fast as well, more so than it did in the sprint qualifying where they ended up. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma there for Charles Leclerc. Other than that, he had a kind of a clean race, not quite putting pressure on the McLarens, but having to play more defensive posture on Max Verstappen on that Red Bull. Oscar, who had pole position and then ended up in second because they swapped positions, had a pretty much a nice clean race, had a good start, kind of chop blocked down to make sure that he maintained the lead. I think they were worried about Max, doing his nice dive down the inside to pull out, second or third in that, second or first in that first corner. And so he did a good job with that, maintaining that first position and then getting Lando behind. I know there was some frustration with Lando in that run, expecting that swap to happen quicker. And there's some that I would have expected it to be, as they almost messed up that swap, because if that virtual safety car had come out just a little bit earlier, then they would have been stuck in that alternate positions and would have lost that extra point to Max from Lando. So there is that strategy still kind of in the background for McLaren. They aren't quite there for the winning strategies, it seems, for the championship and the Drivers' Championship, putting that really pressure on. But at least they had a plan in place to swap positions and give their lead driver the best opportunity to pull up closer to Max and potentially take over the Drivers' Championship in this run. So whether you agree with that or not, it's up to you. But during this spot, and then I would have thought that they would have had it a little bit closer to lap 5 or lap 10, trying to get that swapped over to give him a little bit cleaner air and let Piastri play more of the defensive role than Lando being able to take off. And then, of course, you have Lando who started off in second and ended up in first due to that swap. And that swap, of course, happened on lap 21. So very near the end of the race before that actually even happened. So the whole sprint race, you can see, was kind of a mix. Oscar was in the lead on lap 5 with a half a second over his teammate Lando, and that went up to a little over a second on lap 10 with Oscar still in the lead. In lap 15, it was back down to a 0.55 second lead over Lando, and then they swapped positions, and it was, a minute fraction at the end, basically due to that virtual safety car and them having to do the driver constructor rule about swapping positions with their teammate. So overall, it seems that Oscar was able to keep that lead fairly easily, even though I think Lando said he could attack at one point, but that would have put more wear on those tires and potentially had a little bit more issue if something went wrong in that pass with his teammate and open the door. So I think that's why they were trying to play it, safe, play it, where they're just biding their time on that and almost basically waited too long before making that move. And so in my view, they should have done it earlier on. But what was your thoughts on that? So overall, I thought it was a fairly decent sprint race. Max coming back, and I was thinking Max was going to be able to actually overtake Oscar at one point, but that didn't quite happen either. So there's some of that, and I think we're going to basically anticipate a really good GP race tomorrow and see how things play out. So what did that do to the driver standings? Basically nothing. Max still has the lead with 367. It just shrank a little bit, but now with Lando with 323. And then Charles Leclerc with 297. So they claim that they can get up to there, but I don't really see that. And then Oscar now with 258. The rest of the field basically stays the same. And so not a whole lot to say on the driver standings. And I still have the red and the Ferraris there in that run color, even though they didn't change in the sprint race. They just kind of gaps kind of moved around. McLaren now has 581 points over Ferrari's 547. And Red Bull now has 518. So there's still that potential that of those three, those three constructors being able to take the Constructors Championship. We'll have to see how those play out in the future. Last several races to see what the gains are there. The big thing here, I think, is Alpine gaining 2 points, so they're just now 1 point behind Williams. So there's a good shot that Alpine could potentially take over that 8th position on that Constructors standings. And so what do we have next? Of course, we have the actual GP race tomorrow on November 3rd, and it will be a total race distance of 190.064 miles with 71 laps being run, with a length for each lap being 2.677 miles. It was first, of course, introduced in 1973, and the current lap record holder is Valtteri Bottas in 2018 with 1 minute 10.54 seconds. So we'll have to see if that gets anywhere close with this new pavement on this that seems to be a little bit bumpy and potentially a little bit greasy as well. So we'll have to see how if that even get close to that lap record. Well, until then, I will see you on the grid, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow for my GP post-race reaction. And if you would like, keep an eye on this channel or subscribe. Thank you very much.